On October 7th, 2023, the world's eyes were on the Middle East as Hamas terrorists attacked Israel, murdering indiscriminately, taking hostages. Scenes of unfathomable cruelty. Israel was struck to its core.
I just lay there and thought, is this how I'm going to die?
I think October 7th is a new phase for us as Jewish people right after the Holocaust.
It's the bloodiest day in the history of the Zionist-Arab conflict.
This was an incredibly serious trauma for the Israeli people.
Right now, we feel like, never again is now.
Israel responded with war. Its goal was the complete destruction of Hamas. But the bombings and expulsion of Palestinians felt like a repeat of their own painful history, the Nakba, catastrophe, the loss of their homeland.
We're experiencing the most terrible form of displacement in the most horrifying way. We're experiencing sheer horror.
In my opinion, this is worse than the Nakba. I think people have a challenge to find words to describe what's taking place in Gaza.
I lost 70 or more members of my family. Yesterday, I just lost my cousin and his 2 children.
It's a very big trauma for the people there.
A new low in the conflict has been reached since October 7th. How can it be that horrific violence continues to beget even more violence without hardly any compassion?
Both sides show no empathy whatsoever for the other side's suffering because of the horrendous trauma both have experienced in the past.
Both sides are now in trauma mind. They're in a state of high emotion that is contaminating their capacity to think clearly.
What are these traumas? And why do Israelis and Palestinians continue these cycles of trauma again and again? What does October 7th mean for the future of the Middle East? This is now the longest open war in Israel's history. Is there hope? Is there a way out? The Gaza Strip, a narrow piece of land between 6 and 14 kilometers wide and 40 kilometers long and densely populated. Before October 7th, more than 2 million people lived here. In their midst, the radical Islamic militant group Hamas was preparing a major attack. These images are not from October 7th, they're Hamas training videos in the Gaza Strip.
They were training on different models of Israeli villages, Israeli towns, Israeli military positions and camps. And they were doing it consistently.
I saw also the division between those who fight and those who kidnap. And you saw the whole plans through different angles of the training.
At several different sites, Hamas trained for October 7th, more or less in plain sight. Israel could also see what was going on.
We saw these videos before 7th of October. We knew of them before 7th of October.
I'm embarrassed to say that there is much more than these videos. I'm embarrassed to say, much more intelligence. So we saw it. We knew the plan for a decade.
They knew exactly what was going on. They just didn't believe Sinwar intends to go at this point.
Hamas leader Yahya Sinir is considered one of the masterminds of October 7th. Why did Hamas post these videos online? Why did it reveal its plans?
Hamas, like any other organization, is looking for publicity and for propaganda. And I think what they were doing is rallying people around them.
They wanted legitimacy. They wanted to show how well they've been organized, militarized, working as a very, well developed military organization.
Israel didn't take the videos seriously.
Part of the problem is the arrogance and the feeling that we have the best technology, we have the best understanding, the best.
For those Israeli generals, not all of them, it was like a routine, normal conduct of an army, which is training for Judgment Day. They didn't see it as an actual preparation for an imminent strike.
We knew we were facing a terrorist organization that will always want to eliminate us. But we sort of lived in denial that, they're just training. That was the, what we said, the misconception.
Most people living on the Israeli side of the border to the Gaza Strip had no idea that a major attack was being planned on the Palestinian side. Just behind this fence lies the Kibbutz near Oz. Almost 400 people lived here. This was Hadas Calderon's home.
We're about 2.5 kilometers from the fence. Behind the fence are Khan Yunis and other Arab villages.
Near Oz, like most kibbutzim, is an agricultural, intentional community. Most living there were left-wing and liberal.
I was born here, lived in Tel Aviv, traveled the world. I returned and started a family. I met Ofer, my husband, but now he is my ex-husband. We have 4 children, and I run a clinic for alternative medicine. Things weren't quiet, because for 20 years there were many terrorist attacks with rockets. Life in the kibbutz was somewhere between heaven and hell. Most of the time it was paradise. A pastoral, quiet, green place, pleasant. But once or twice a year, it turned into hell. The children grow up in the shadow of this situation. They develop anxiety. Especially Erez, my younger son. He was afraid to be alone. I had to put him to bed every night. We often thought about moving, but it's not that easy. Still, deep down, you know it's not healthy for children to grow up like this. But we're rooted here. This was home.
Living so close to the fence was only possible because the Israeli state guaranteed security.
Security is not the correct word, for us. It's an existential war. It's our essence to keep our lives. It's not only a simple security,
And every politician that I can remember was always running on the ticket of Mr. Security. You are elected as prime minister because of security, not because of the economic situation.
The big trauma for Israel is that Jews have never felt safe anywhere in the world.
As Jewish people, we will always live around people that we feel wants to kill us. It doesn't matter where. In the south, in the north, somewhere abroad, there will always be someone that thinks that we are not, appropriate, that we don't deserve to live.
We were brought up on the stories of our parents. Some of them came from the Holocaust.
They have been murdered. They have been seen as vermin throughout Europe and also the Middle East.
So it's a kind of a mindset that we can live wherever and we will just need to be on alert constantly.
A long history of pogroms. The Holocaust. Jews in Israel are still marked by this suffering.
This is the state that we established after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, okay? That came out of the ashes to be a haven to Jews from all over the world.
And Israel was seen as the one place on earth where Jews might feel safe.
But true security remained elusive. Neighboring Arab countries did not accept a UN resolution for the establishment of a Jewish state. 5 of them attacked Israel.
The Holocaust is not the only trauma Israel has had to deal with. There was the War of Independence of 1948, when Israel was attacked by all the surrounding Arab countries.
This country has been going forever to war. 48, 56, 67, 69, 70, 73, 82, 96, 2 intifadas, and now this current war.
We were engaged in constant, intermittent fighting and confrontations with our adversaries. It never stopped.
I think it's impossible to understand the Israeli psychology without understanding this longing to be finally safe and secure.
Here in the south of Israel, that longing for security takes the form of steel and concrete. Israel wanted to protect itself following the disengagement from Gaza in 2005. An ultra-modern border fence against attacks. By the time the barrier was finished in 2021, the estimated cost was around 1 billion euros.
This wall will give citizens in the south a sense of security and allow this beautiful region to develop and prosper.
65 kilometers long and 6 meters tall. The wall is fitted with technology, complete with surveillance cameras, motion detectors, and automatic machine guns.
It was invented because of developments that happened on the border. Israel has found that Hamas is digging tunnels under the border in order to bring their people inside the kibbutzim, inside the villages.
Iron wall. We will pose an iron wall, a strong defensive system, which will deter any adversary from wishing to attack.
Also, we put many sensors in the depth that will alert us if somebody is trying still to go under the obstacle.
I don't think there is any state in the world that has some of this kind of technology.
Until October 7th, 2023, Israel believed this barrier was unbreachable and a guarantee of security.
I believe that the security barrier against Gaza and on the West Bank border fulfilled 2 objectives. First, to guarantee Israel's security, putting them inside a kind of voluntary ghetto, with walls and barriers designed to provide a sense of security. But they serve an additional purpose. They make sure that Israel doesn't have to deal with the Palestinians. They disappear behind the walls, behind the fence. That way no one has to face them or hear from them. Israel is no longer reminded of them. They are there and we are here, and that gives us peace of mind.
I do think that Israelis prefer not to think about how Palestinians were and are living in Gaza. It's excruciatingly painful, and it's easier not to think about it.
People lost interest. So I'm on television. We are sitting at the biggest television network in Israel. If we broadcast too much about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, etc., we lose viewers.
It is correct to say that people don't want to hear about what is happening there. We have enough of our suffering. We don't want to hear.
They're afraid. People are afraid. You know, it's the same thing why people don't want to learn Arabic. Same thing. They don't want to be attached with that language. They don't want to be attached with these people. You know, this is the enemy. I know for a fact that people that, escaped from the Holocaust didn't want to hear German language, didn't want to visit Germany, they wanted to disattach from that. I think the same thing happened with Arabic. This is the language of the enemy.
And that enemy lives here, Gaza City, on the other side of the fence. There are only 2 border crossings to Israel, and the State of Israel controls everything coming in and going out. Bashar al-Belbisi was born here. He studied pharmacology and worked in his parents' pharmacy until the war started. Every day behind the fence is hard, even before the war.
I'm 23 years old. I've never known a day when there hasn't been a power cut in Gaza. The Israeli occupation puts us under constant pressure. They want us to leave our country. They want to take over the whole of Palestine. They've been putting pressure on the Palestinian people for a very long time, especially on us here in Gaza. The blockade, the difficulty of traveling, realizing your dreams, moving around, everything is difficult.
Even before October 7th, resignation and depression were widespread. But Bashar remained optimistic. His passion is Dabka, the Palestinian national dance. Bashar is one of the best dancers in Gaza and used to perform regularly.
I feel like I'm flying when I dance Dabka. There's nothing holding me back. I feel free. I can move how I want. I can laugh, be sad. I can leap through the air. I can express everything within me.
To him, dance is a form of therapy, group therapy. It has always been that way.
After every attack, we dance on the rubble and ashes. We smile through the pain. That's the best way of describing it. We want to convey this message, that people here are fighting for their dream and for what they want to achieve. We're no different from the people outside. Only they have more opportunities than we do.
Bashar believes that dance has the power to heal.
In the war, we teach the children to dance the dabka in a simple way so that they can practice and feel it. So it's a way of freeing their minds. Teaching dabka, especially with children, is like planting a seed that will flourish. Our aim is not to train them to be the best dancers, but to be connected to their home, to love the land that is theirs.
A home that Bashar, like all these young people, only knows from stories. Around 70% of Gaza's population are descendants of people who were displaced or fled.
Our families often spoke about the Nakba of 1948, how they fled, how they had to leave their homes, how they survived. We asked if they left without a moment's notice. We couldn't imagine how barbaric the occupation was, that they were under so much pressure that they had to leave.
The Nakba. No other event has had such a lasting impact on Palestinian history.
Well, the word Nakba means the catastrophe. And this is the word that Palestinians use to mark the events that took place in 1947, 1948.
In 1948, all the surrounding Arab states attacked Israel simultaneously. In the course of this conflict, which started out as a defensive war against Arab aggression, Israel drove the Palestinians from many of the areas in question. Or the Palestinians fled for fear of massacres.
The Nakba was an intentional, strategic campaign to ethnically cleanse the historic land of Palestine from the non-Jewish population as much as possible.
I think that it has a very profound effect on the Palestinian psychology.
The stories of the Nakba still burn in the hearts and minds of Palestinian families, moving from generation to generation. And so the trauma lives on and on.
For example, what I heard from my grandmother, sometimes when she sees a beautiful jasmine tree, she says, yeah, this looks like the jasmine tree that we had in Jaffa.
My dad, until today, he still have the key for their home. My dad used to take us to our land in Beersheba. And I remember as a child, one time we went to my aunt home and there was a wedding. And even I was like so crazy happy that finally we saw the land, you know.
This event is so remarkable in Palestinian history because many individuals get traumatized directly. And it is not one event only. It's a prolonged trauma.
Many Palestinians were not allowed to return after the 1948 war. They and their descendants still don't have a home to this day.
The Nakba is the basic of everything. It's the basic of everything. That's what keeps them going. That's what generates, you know, the ideology and the violence and the aggressions and the anger and the humiliation. And like all these emotions comes from the Nakba. That's the main thing.
The belief that everything used to be better in the past and the hopeless reality of the blockade. A perfect breeding ground for radicalism.
Life in Gaza was very, very difficult before October 7th. Unemployment is known as being one of the highest in the world during that time. The restrictions on movements were completely controlled.
And the rate of mental health suffering was also very high.
Studies have come to the conclusion that over 90% of Palestinian children have been traumatized once or even several times by bombs, by war, loss of relatives, the destruction of their homes and schools.
A lot of them, they are actually experiencing depression, anxiety, they are experiencing anger, outrage. Some of them, they told me, they wouldn't go to the bathroom unless their mother with them. Some of them, they would stay wherever their mother is or their parent is, and they would not move.
For many Palestinians in Gaza, it is clear who is to blame, not Hamas, Israel. In March 2018, major protests kicked off in Gaza. 70 years after the Nakba, every Friday saw thousands of people march to the border fence.
For me, the March of Return is a great event of Palestinian nonviolent activism to claim our legitimate rights as Palestinians, to be recognized, first of all, as a nation, to be recognized as worthy of a state, and also to be recognized that we were forced out of our communities and our lands and our villages in 1948 through the Nakba, through the ethnic cleansing campaign.
It's another way of Palestinians saying, we are here, we're human beings, we have the right to have a state or a country. We are tired of this life. We are tired of the blockade. We are tired of the bombing. We want to live a normal life like every other human being.
For almost 2 years, week after week, Palestinians demonstrated in the thousands. The atmosphere was charged and increasingly aggressive. Hamas exploited this anger.
It was Palestinians who were very, very frustrated with the closure, with the lockdown, with the blockade over Gaza, and Hamas rode that wave for its benefit. And it wasn't initiated at all by Hamas.
Yahya Sinir, Hamas leader in the Gaza Strip, soon took the helm of this movement.
Today, our people begin a new phase in their history of struggle and national resistance, on the road to liberation and return. Today, our people in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the territories occupied in 1948 and from abroad, are coming forward in their entirety to usher in this new phase and correct course.
The Israeli government was alarmed. When Palestinians stormed the fence, the military responded with rubber bullets, tear gas, sometimes even live ammunition. Anyone approaching the fence risked their life. Hundreds were killed, tens of thousands injured.
So many people, innocent Palestinians, were killed during that time, during the March of Return.
It is a failure for those who initiated it, definitely. But all Palestinian attempts to achieve anything until now were almost a failure. They tried diplomatic means, they tried negotiation, they tried the Oslo process, they tried two intifadas, and until now, that is a failure.
The Yahya Sinir, I think that since the end of those events, he started to think about broader, more dramatic offensive against Israel, and this was, of course, October the 7th.
Since 2017, Yahya Sinir has been Hamas's top official and de facto leader of Gaza.
Yahya Sinir is definitely the mastermind for October 7th.
Well, I met him. I don't know to say how well I know him. He's a very cunning, shrewd, calculating type of fellow. People say he's borderline psychopath. I don't know.
He's very charismatic. He has a very strong personality. He's very tough. And let's say it, he's very cruel, very brutal.
If you profile someone like Sinir, okay, this is a person that ideology is the most important thing for him.
Sinwar's declared goal is to destroy Israel and kill all Jews in the country.
The masses of our people and our nation will pour over the borders like raging floods and uproot your entire being. They will find a knife to stab you, a car to run you over, or a Molotov cocktail to burn your hearts.
Sinir was born in the Gaza Strip in 1962 to refugee parents. He is a founding member of Hamas and one of its most radical voices. In his 20s, he was sentenced to jail by Israel.
He was sentenced for life.
He was in prison for killing Palestinian collaborators, not for killing Israelis.
He used his long imprisonment to study his enemy. His sharp mind made him all the more dangerous to Israel.
22 years in different prisons in Israel. He read everything he could. He speaks very good Hebrew.
By reading the history of Israel, as well as the Holocaust and other pogroms in the before and others, that they understood the feeling and the trauma of the Jewish people.
It certainly looks as though Yahya Sinir studied the Israeli psyche in order to figure out how to maximize pain for the Israeli people. It would appear that he really understands exactly how to get under the skin of Israelis.
Fellow inmates feared and respected Sinir. He positioned himself as a leader among the prisoners and proved himself to be both ruthless and violent. In 2011, Sinir was released together with a number of loyal followers in a prisoner exchange.
Netanyahu released him, along with 1,000 other Palestinian prisoners, in order to get one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, who spent almost 5 years in captivity in 2011.
There was a lot of public opinion pressure, and at one point, Bibi reached the conclusion that it's politically wiser for him to give in and release, in spite of the objection of many in the security establishment.
Although I didn't condemn this deal even once, after me and my friends stood at the prison that day with tears in our eyes to see all the murderers that we chased for years going free, okay, with these movements and ribbons and flags of Hamas, okay? For me, it was a black day. It was a disaster.
Sinwar was given a hero's welcome. The future mastermind of October 7th immediately set about expanding his influence in the Hamas power structure. And he succeeded in further increasing his popularity.
Since the moment he came out of prison, he was speaking about doing whatever he can to release his fellow prisoners who were left behind.
One of the things we have to assume that Sinwar learned is that Israelis will not leave anyone behind.
And for him, it's a vision to release all the prisoners, which is a very sensitive point with the Palestinian society. He wins the minds and the hearts of the people in the society by presenting himself as the protector of the prisoner, as the savior of the prisoners.
The fate of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails remains a major issue in Gaza. Sinwar knows that in exchange for Israeli hostages, he could secure their release.
His actions do strongly suggest that he learned that taking hostages could be extremely effective.
But we can see that he decided I can do much more. I can go for a massive release of prisoners, but for something much bigger. I can undermine the foundations of Israel's security, of Israeli self-confidence. That's where he was heading.
Israel was initially unaware of these plans. Sinwar appeared to be focused on Gaza and his own rise to power.
Sinwar comes out of prison with few of his trusted comrades.
Very quickly, he moved aside all the leaders, including Ismail Haniyeh, which was, after the coup in Gaza, the prime minister of Hamas government.
Haniyeh, who was killed in Tehran in 2024, left for Qatar. Sinwar and his men wasted no time.
They take over the political bureau, pack it with people from the military branch. The political leadership is paralyzed, sent outside Gaza.
He moved the circle to Gaza, the center of power to Gaza. So at the first time, at the last decade, the power center of Hamas became to be in Gaza and not abroad with the exile government, okay?
In internal elections in 2017, Yahya Sinir was made head of Hamas in Gaza. He knew how to mobilize his people.
Hamas has established itself and rooted itself within Palestinian consciousness, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. And I personally will say I don't agree with everything almost that Hamas says.
When you are a victim, you are being in the corner. You're being beaten every day. And you have a hand is being extended to you. You're going to hold to that hand no matter what is that hand. It's as simple as that.
So Sinwar came with the vision of he will create the special forces, the Nakba, those that penetrated Israel. He will establish the possibilities of Hamas to fight Israel in a better way than before.
An important tool in the fight against Israel, tunnels. Under the Hamas regime, a network of underground tunnels has been built throughout the Gaza Strip over the years.
So tunnels is the way for them to hide from Israel Air Force. It enabled them also to have all these plants that they have been producing missiles and rockets in a way that Israel will not be able to, from the air, to bomb it.
There are said to be over 1,000 tunnels in the Gaza Strip, often kilometers long. The network is known as the Gaza Metro. Hamas controls both the construction and operation of the tunnels. Weapons are manufactured and transported here. Hamas fighters, for example, dig out water pipes to use for the construction of rockets, as Hamas demonstrates in this video posted online.
There's something so troubling about the idea of water pipes, pipes that carry the essence of life, being used to create instruments of murder. And it tells us something about the state of mind of Hamas fighters. It's essentially become a kind of death cult.
The essence of life in radical Islamic thought is the afterlife, not the life in this world. We don't understand it because we have a Western way of thinking.
Hamas is about one thing, which is the eradication of the state of Israel. From their point of view, it takes precedence over anything else, including the well-being of the population.
Rockets and missiles in the holy war against the devil is legitimate. This is it. It's simple as that.
Hamas can also count on its powerful allies.
I'm sure it was done with the support of Iran and Hezbollah, because they are also doing same things in their countries.
In September 2020, Israel signed the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, mediated by the US, with the later additions of Morocco and Sudan. The focus was on establishing diplomatic relations, a coup for Benjamin Netanyahu, while Palestinians were brushed aside. The first Israeli scheduled flight to the Emirates, a symbol of a normalization of ties.
There was a big disappointment in seeing the level, actually, of normalization that was happening. The daily continuous flights of Israeli Jews to Dubai and doing parties and celebrations and business ventures over there and back and forth, flying over us as Palestinians, both sides, as we are still suffering under this occupation.
By signing the Abraham Accords and reaching an agreement with Saudi Arabia, the Israeli government under Netanyahu tried to bypass the Palestinians altogether. But this is the typical behavior of a child who covers its eyes with its hands when it's afraid or can't deal with the situation.
The high point of this normalization was the first visit by an Israeli president to Abu Dhabi. Israel celebrated the deal as a major turning point. But for the Palestinians, it represented a threat, relegating the question of their future to the margins. They protested angrily against this perceived betrayal.
I think Palestinians and many other people in the Arab world feel that the Abraham Accords represent those who signed it. They don't represent the hopes and the conscience and the aspiration of the Arab nations, and of course not the Palestinians. And I think the Abraham Accords are another tool to deny Palestinian history and Palestinian rights.
The Palestinians could greatly benefit from a broader peace. They should be part of that process, but they should not have a veto over the process.
He very arrogantly thought that he could shove it into the Palestinians' face, the fact that he is about to sign a deal with Saudi Arabia, even though the Saudis insisted that a pathway towards a Palestinian state be part of the deal.
The whole Middle East changes.
A new Middle East. On the map, no Gaza, no West Bank, a psychological trigger of past Palestinian trauma.
But we do something else.
I think there was a direct correlation between the attacks of October 7th and the accords that were happening, especially with Saudi Arabia, where the Gaza Strip Hamas, the political solution for the Palestinian situation was neglected. My opinion is that Hamas was trying to reclaim a power position in the negotiations in determining what is the future instead of being marginalized.
Then there is the unresolved issue of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which violate international law. There are now 150 of them, with more than 700,000 inhabitants. That means 1 in 14 Israelis now lives in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Netanyahu's far-right government claims the exclusive right to what it calls the Judea and Samaria area, the West Bank.
The settlers can trade their political power for the wish by Likud in general and Netanyahu personally to rule over Israel. So the tail is wagging the dog.
Israel is a project. It's a movement. It's something that is all the time extending. All the time wants more land, more houses, and grabbing more land with less Palestinians, more land. So this brings back all the time the memories of the Nakba.
Many Palestinians feel totally traumatized by the experience of having soldiers check them before they can cross a border. More obvious triggers of trauma for Palestinians are taking of a house, obviously any kind of military action, any kind of Israeli violence is a trauma trigger for Palestinians.
I think there are trigger effects on both sides. Israeli military violence terrifies the Palestinians, and rightly so. They're afraid that they might be driven out again, forced to flee again. And the Israelis are rightly afraid that terror attacks against Israel will again be planned and carried out.
I think what we are doing in the West Bank with more and more points of settlers is ruining the future of the Israeli Jewish state. No question about that.
The situation escalated further in spring 2021. It began with protests in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem against an anticipated court decision to evict Palestinians from their homes to make way for Israeli settlers.
I think the Sheikh Jarrah became a symbolic expression of the ethnic cleansing campaign that's happening in and around Jerusalem. And especially because it was led by very extreme zealot settlers that were engaging in this. And then they made it very, very clear. They're demonizing, their attacks, their insults of the Palestinians that were living there and taking homes and removing the furniture, throwing it out in such a brutal way was a wake-up call for many people that this is a continuation.
Palestinians and some left-wing Israelis protested against the evictions. Amid this heated atmosphere, clashes broke out on the Temple Mount, and Israeli police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine for Muslims. Hamas took advantage of the Palestinians' outrage.
Hamas saw fit to portray itself as the guardian of the holy place Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem.
Hamas fired rockets. The Israeli response was harsh as usual. War once again broke out, with hundreds killed. Yahya Sinir's house in the Gaza Strip was also destroyed in an attack.
But the moment there was a ceasefire, he came out of the ruins and sat in a chair to show, of course, that he has survived, that he will persist. And yes, it was an act of defiance. After this particular operation, Israel believed erroneously that Hamas would be deterred, as the chief of intelligence at the time said, that is 2.5 years ago, they will be deterred for the next 5 years at least. Turns out he was wrong.
In early 2023, 10 months before October 7th, Israel had its own worries. The country was rocked by demonstrations. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets to protest against the government's controversial judicial reform aimed at curtailing the power of the Supreme Court. Netanyahu was under increasing pressure.
There were intelligence reports on quotes of Hamas that they understand that the situation in Israel is very bad because of the dispute about the judicial reform.
At the same time, the IDF was monitoring suspicious activity on the border with Gaza.
Spotters, they for 2 or 3 weeks before the offensive, they watched and they saw all the training nearby the border, and they were told, listen, shut your mouth. You know nothing about the strategy, because we know that they are deterred and there is no threat.
But I think that if you don't want to see something, you won't see it.
If Israel was watching carefully the Hamas channels and Hamas TV and radio and newspapers, the main slogan was jihad, jihad, jihad.
Something was evidently brewing in the Gaza Strip. Amphibious landings, dummy tanks, house-to-house fighting. In September, armed Palestinian groups carried out joint drills for these situations. Israeli media reported on these exercises, but the government did nothing. Yet intelligence had long been in possession of the so-called Jericho Wall Plan, a Hamas blueprint for a large-scale attack.
We had the plans. We got hold of, lots of documents that literally said what they're planning on doing. It wasn't even a secret, most of it.
The question, if it's more a drill, was raised 3 or 4 days before the attack, and everybody said from the intelligence system that it's only drills, it's only training.
An extraordinary miscalculation with terrible consequences. At this point in Israel, people felt safe. So safe, in fact, that a music festival was held near the Gaza Strip.
We left the house at about midnight. People had said it was going to be a huge festival. Artists had been brought in from abroad, and it was going to be really cool. An opportunity to celebrate. I didn't ask where it was happening. Then I saw Gaza on the navigation and asked, how come we're so close to Gaza? When we arrived, I saw a lot of police, security, and military and thought, okay, we're safe here. It'll be fine. Worst case scenario, there might be rocket fire. I can't describe the feeling. It was the greatest 6 hours of my life. We were jumping around, enjoying ourselves. It was more than just music.
October 6th, around 4,000 people came together to dance in the Negev desert, just 5 kilometers from the border to Gaza. On the other side of the fence, Hamas was beginning their assault on Israel. Phase 1.
First of all, they activated all the cellular phones.
With Israeli SIM cards, which have been bought freely on the Israeli market.
This was one of the signs that, from Israel's point of view, should have brought the whole army on the border.
If they wanted to communicate, they couldn't have used their Palestinian phones. Wouldn't have operated inside Israel.
The problem was that we failed to understand that this activation could be for only one purpose.
In Tel Aviv, alarms were going off among the intelligence community.
We know that there was a video meeting of the heads of the military, and they understood that something different is happening, and they decided to talk again early in the morning. Too late.
The attack began that same night.
Somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, people on the side of Hamas were gathering in mosques and other places.
So you have an unbelievable situation in which 3,000 Hamas fighters
are called to the mosques.
Not by phones or any radio, by messengers, physically.
Instructed to pick up their weapons from home and report for duty. They still don't know they are going on the attack. They think it's a drill.
Mosques are one of the places where underneath they have ammunition and everything.
Only a handful of commanders knew really that it's going for real.
The low level, and I spoke with quite a lot of them, they knew about it only in the morning, early in the morning.
6:29 a.m. Hamas launched thousands of rockets.
They started with rockets and missiles, and because they knew that the Israelis are used to missiles and rockets.
Across the country, authorities declared red alert.
It's not a regular campaign. When you shoot 3,000 or 4,000, you can see on TV screen all over the country, there is an artillery of missiles. So many people understood at that minute that there's going to be an infiltration, but nobody thought that it would be that big.
The rocket barrage was meant to cover up for the real motive of the operation.
Hamas fighters used aerial drones to drop grenades on the towers, disabling the cameras, sensors, and automatic guns.
What Hamas cleverly planned was to hit those very sensors in the first moments of the attack.
Shooting, very simple.
Some 3,000 heavily armed fighters from Hamas and other militias advanced to the border fence.
When they were on the fence, they told all of the warriors, it's not a drill, we are going in. And then they explode the fence in dozens of points on the fence.
Sinwar has decided, I think fairly last minute, to go for 60 points, crossing points into Israel, instead of 4 or 5, in order to grab hostages, go back, and then negotiate an exchange.
Every unit was in charge of a specific place. You are in charge of that military base. You are in charge of that city. You are in charge of that kibbutz. So everyone has a mission.
They infiltrated Israel on scooters, pickup trucks.
They didn't know about the other missions, okay? They were very focused, very specific. And that's how it was so well orchestrated.
Thousands of Hamas terrorists stormed the border. Hamas knew the Israeli army wouldn't be fully operational because October 7th was a Jewish holiday, and numerous troops had already been deployed to the West Bank. Defensive strongpoints were overrun. Then, they attacked in motorized paragliders.
On their way, they clashed into the music festival. It was a surprise. They didn't have intelligence about this party or this festival ahead. Okay, but it was very good for them. Thousands of targets.
The festival organizers were informed that an attack was underway.
Suddenly, the music stopped. I looked up at the sky and saw what looked like fireworks. We were by the dance floor and saw a drone and waved to it. We thought it was part of the event and was photographing the festival. Then we heard the shots coming closer and closer. Suddenly there was a truck in front of us. They ran at us and shot at the car. We jumped out of the car and started running. People next to me were falling over. I didn't understand what was happening. I had to stop. My legs were shaking. I couldn't run. There was smoke everywhere and shots being fired above me. I didn't see my life flash before me the way they say you do. I just lay there and thought, is this how I'm going to die?
More than 350 young people were murdered by Hamas. It was a massacre. Around 40 people were taken hostage at the festival and taken to Gaza. More and more fighters crossed the open fence into Israel.
Once it started, it lured others to join. And then suddenly, people that have never been trained crossed the border and went to put on their frustration and anger and anxiety on the poor victims that were there.
The Israeli villages and towns are so close to the border. 5 minutes, sometimes walking, sometimes running, that all they need is to cross at several points and they are within the kibbutzim.
Once you cross in, it became a jungle of warfare on the other side.
The Hamas terrorists also attacked the kibbutz near Oz. Many of the residents were still asleep. The militants fired at anyone they saw.
I heard voices in Arabic, shouts, screams, terrible noises, explosions. And I realized there weren't just rockets.
After about an hour's walk, we managed to get into 2 of the main kibbutzim, near Oz and near Am. We are here in the heart of the settlement.
At 8:30 in the morning, I got a message from my ex-husband, who was with our children, saying there was a terrorist in the house. They jumped out of the window of the safe room and were hiding in the bushes. The power was off, including the air conditioning. It was dark and hot, and I could hear them coming. They were in my house. They weren't in a hurry. That's what struck me. They weren't in a hurry. They walked around as if it were their village. They walked around and killed casually. They looted. They brought their whole village with them. Young, children, older people, everyone was there, and no one came to save us. When I went outside, I saw houses burning and parked cars. Everything was broken, destroyed, burnt, mutilated bodies. I began to realize the extent of this catastrophe. Shoah. We were experiencing a Shoah. There is no other word for it. I called my family, but my children didn't answer. Their father didn't answer. My mother didn't answer. 5 members of my family had disappeared. I didn't know where they were. My mother is 80. Noya, my 13-year-old niece, is autistic. Ofer, the father of my children. Erez, my 12-year-old son, and my 16-year-old daughter, Sahar. I panicked. Shortly afterwards, a video appeared online. It showed my son Erez being taken hostage. Five days later, I got the official confirmation that they'd been taken hostage. On October 18th, there was a knock on our door. I was informed that my mother and Noya had been found in a shelter, in a pool of blood.
The militants abducted Israelis, both young and old, and took them to Gaza.
They planned to capture 10 to 20 people. Those were the orders. And to bring 240 people was a surprise, was a strategic surprise to us and for them also.
Almost every Israeli knows someone who was killed or taken hostage. October 7th is the bloodiest day in the history of the Jewish people since the Shoah, the Holocaust. Israel was in a state of shock, another trauma.
I look at it backwards and I think it still looks like a dream or like a nightmare.
Soldiers, civilian, man, woman, child, they were all for Hamas, legitimate targets for their atrocities. It was a massacre, it was not a military operation, and it was horrific.
The militants had infiltrated 18 kilometers into Israel, murdering and taking hostages.
It was a big area. All the southern Negev was conquered for 48 hours.
It was carnage. Before too long, the question everyone was asking was, how could the state of Israel let this happen?
It was a combination, sort of a Murphy's Law.
Everything that could be wrong happened on this day.
There was not enough force. People were not in their places. It was a holiday morning. Israel, in a way, prepared for a very, very minor incident, not for the outbreak of a war.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war. Not an operation, not a round of fighting, at war. The enemy will pay an unprecedented price.
Israel tried to regain control, recapture military posts, and free hostages.
The feeling was a mixture of shock, shame, revenge, failure. Because Israel was shocked out of its equilibrium, it took it 3 weeks to prepare a ground operation.
The Gaza Strip was completely sealed off, and 360,000 reservists mobilized for a counterattack.
I think that the Israeli leadership feels determined to eradicate the terrorist threat. But it's hard not to see that revenge is playing a role.
The revenge is not a good thing when you calculate your steps in a war, okay? But you cannot prevent it. It would be naive to think that nobody wanted revenge.
It's an all too human impulse, but it is not a good strategy for winning.
I was very apprehensive and I expected a very revengeful reaction from Israelis.
And I remember very well calling my cousin in Gaza at that time and say, find a way to get out of there. This is going to inflict a disaster.
A few hours after the massacres, Israel attacked Gaza from the air with devastating effect. 3 weeks later, it launched a ground offensive with tens of thousands of soldiers. Gaza became a battlefield and was reduced to rubble. Israeli forces began destroying the tunnel network. They also hunted Yahya Sinir, public enemy #1. but footage showed that he and his family had escaped through the Gaza metro.
It was found in cameras, DVRs, in the tunnels that we entered.
It was taken on October the 7th or 8th. It was found several weeks later. By that time, Sinwar went elsewhere, was not seen ever since.
I think Israel will do whatever possible to kill him, but he is not a guy who is going to die in bed. He's in a bunker. Whether it's under Khan Yunis or under Rafah, I don't know.
He knows better than anyone all the tunnels. And of course, he is surrounded by hostages.
I do believe my information that they were able to get to him, but because of the fear for the lives of hostages, they refrained.
In Israel, the October 7th massacre has a face. This oversized banner in Tel Aviv reads, "Think who benefits from the division. Unity now."
Sinwar is an incredibly important symbol for Hamas, but especially for the Israeli people. So we can understand the need, the perceived need to get him, to feel safe.
To focus exclusively on one person and say, once we get him, we will win, to me that's infantile.
I think Sinwar is important like bin Laden was important. It's a symbol, but we don't have to prolong the war in order to find him. We might find him in 10 years from now also.
Israel, of course, erred in not finding a better and more clever ways for conducting surgical strikes in order to get the hostages out and to kill Sinwar and his colleagues.
According to the United Nations, airstrikes and the invasion of the Gaza Strip have killed more than 40,000 people and injured over 90,000, including many women and children. Israel defends the large-scale attacks by claiming that Hamas is hiding among the civilian population. More than 70,000 buildings have been destroyed. Hundreds of thousands are homeless. Hunger, disease, and despair are everywhere.
I can't even imagine the level of fear and trauma the population in Gaza is living in now, not knowing in any moment if they or members of their family are going to be killed.
I lost 70 or more members of my family. Of course, we lost all our homes. We lost everything we ever had.
The worst part about what's happening now in Gaza is that it's being televised. Everyone knows about it. Everyone can watch what's happening in Gaza on their screens. And the world has not managed to stop it.
Yet another generation in Gaza is living through war, becoming traumatized and susceptible to radicalization. This will not make Israel safer.
It's correct to say that people that are now suffering from Israel will be anti-Israel in the future. It's correct.
When will the war end? No one can say. There appears to be no clear goal.
What is it that Netanyahu wants? What is it that Israel wants? Are they trying to eliminate, Palestinians totally? Or what is the deal?
Bashar al-Belbisi fled the bombings like many others.
We just had a strike here. There was shelling too. It was very loud. The situation here is dangerous. It's dangerous to be here. It's also dangerous for anyone thinking of returning. Until the war, this was a big prison, enclosed on 3 sides by a fence, the 4th side the sea. The war has turned it into a small prison. Now there are planes overhead, bombing and trying to kill us.
Bashar now lives in the south. The north, his home, has been completely devastated.
The worst thing is, you don't know where you're going, where you're going to live, if you'll ever go home again. We left without knowing that we wouldn't come back. We didn't think it would last 6 months. We said to ourselves, maybe a few days, 2 weeks, and we'll be back. We didn't even take our clothes with us. No documents, no certificates, nothing that was important to us.
Since October 7th, hundreds of thousands of people have been fleeing across Gaza in search of shelter. There is a lack of water, food, and medical supplies.
These are normal people from Gaza City. They've been on their feet for 200 days, and you can see it in their eyes. They're marked by grief and exhaustion. Above all, they've lost hope to continue living there again, because there was absolutely nothing left to eat. There was constant bombing, death and destruction everywhere. There's no safe place left in Gaza. It was simply too dangerous in the north. They wanted to drive out the whole population from northern Gaza.
Bashar and his family have fled 3 times now. For now, they are camping here on the beach.
These places were uninhabited before the war. We're experiencing the most terrible form of displacement in the most horrifying way. We have to endure such cruelty.
There are no winners in this war. Palestinians are experiencing immense death and suffering. Israel is mourning its dead, hoping that the hostages still held by Hamas will come home.
The hostage-taking was a horrible experience for the Israelis. The idea that there are still hostages in tunnels in Gaza today, that women are still being raped, is something that I don't think any Israeli can cope with.
We are speaking about innocent citizens that a brutal terror organization kidnapped, and they suffer. The humiliation is unacceptable.
Israel has succumbed to a kind of melancholy, some form of depression.
The faces of the hostages can be seen everywhere in the streets. Everyone here knows their names, their stories. Their relatives, in particular, continue to protest against Netanyahu and his government, like here outside the US Embassy in Tel Aviv.
This extreme right-wing government is keen to continue the war and not focused on bringing home the hostages.
Netanyahu did not care about the hostages, or at least understood that he will not be able to reach his war aim of eliminating Hamas if he cared about the hostages.
This is the reason why you heard Sarah Netanyahu saying to the families, you are playing into the hands of Sinwar, which is of course terrible to say to parents of children that are there, but I know where it comes from. Of course, Sinwar and others know that we are sensitive and know that we are a democratic state and know that people will demonstrate on the streets. Of course.
The families are keeping up their campaigns and unleashing their anger. This demonstration is in front of the party headquarters of Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu's party. The hostage-taking has re-triggered the trauma of the Shoah.
Hamas is playing a remarkably cruel game, a kind of psychological warfare, by continuing to post videos of hostages. That way they get under the skin of the Israeli public.
Psychologically, they're hurting us a lot. I mean, their attempts to do everything they can to weaken us is quite visible, and it works.
These glimmers of hope are wearing Israel down. Hadas Calderon's ex-husband is still in the hands of Hamas. Her children were released at the end of November, along with 108 other hostages, in exchange for Palestinian prisoners.
My children were missing for 52 days. Then they came home. We hugged each other and cried. Erez was in shock. He smiled, but he was in shock. He still hasn't been able to cry to this day. Sarah cried immediately and didn't stop. And they talked and talked and talked. They're back. But it's not over. They keep reliving October 7th. They live in uncertainty, in fear. They think that at any moment a terrorist will attack again. Their home is no longer a safe place. Their innocence has been stolen. It has been literally taken from them. There is no more happiness, none. I realize it myself. Nothing makes us happy anymore. We used to be able to enjoy small things. Now we can't. Never. It's as if something has been switched off. Our fight is not over yet. Their father is still there. You can't fight this kind of pain.
For over 75 years, Israelis and Palestinians have been locked in a never-ending spiral of trauma.
I feel traumatized since the day I was born. I was born into the stories of the Holocaust. I was raised under wars. I was a soldier in a war. I'm traumatized from my early years, okay?
New research in epigenetics confirms that the traumatic effect goes for a few generations. It passes from one generation to a few more generations in the future. And I expect that we Palestinians are affected by all these forms.
October 7th and the war in Gaza have ensured that yet another generation of young Israelis and Palestinians remain traumatized. Michal is returning to the scene of the massacre for the first time. She can hear the war in Gaza raging in the distance.
This is a scar that will stay with me my whole life. So many people I will never see again.
She's trying to find ways of coping with what she experienced.
I won't sink into sadness and depression. That's what they want. I won't let it happen. I thought about what I could do personally to tell the story, so that people know what really happened. Also to remember my friends who are no longer here, and to be the voice of the people who can no longer speak. That's how I can heal.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
I come here and tell my story, and I can't believe it really happened. I can't believe it. I watch videos that I'm in. I see in these videos that it happened. I can't believe that such evil exists. Because they didn't just come here to kill. They came here to maim, to humiliate, to degrade us. If the trees could speak.
Is there a path to forgiveness? After what everyone has been through, that seems impossible. Trauma research has shown that hurt people are at a higher risk of hurting other people.
The claim that hurt people is not meant to imply that every person who is hurt will hurt others.
If you've been hurt, and on top of that, you've been educated that you need to be violent towards certain people, and you've also been educated that your family's been hurt as well, and that your people are hurt as well, and you learn of your history in a way that, contribute to that grievances and that, really, really strong victimization, then all that will definitely lead to the fact that you will hurt others.
I've interviewed a lot of perpetrators all over the world. And what I've noticed is that perpetrators invariably see themselves as victims. And perpetrator leaders use that to recruit followers. They tell a story about our victimization in order to mobilize fighters. And in fact, where I noticed this the most was in talking to Jewish extremists in Israel and Hamas members.
When trauma is the basis of an identity, a victim identity, it prevents you from having empathy for others because you are the victim. Since when should the victim feel empathy for the perpetrator? Because if you are the victim, then the other person is the perpetrator. No responsibility is taken for one's own violence on either side. Violence that is excessive, that traumatizes, that has consequences for which responsibility must be taken. Instead, both sides have a victim narrative that legitimizes their violence and relieves them of responsibility for it.
The consequence of always seeing oneself as the victim and the other as a perpetrator is that it becomes possible to commit atrocity. And I think that applies to both sides.
Bashar is trying to help heal the trauma his way, by dancing with children in the refugee camp.
The difficulty of dance training specifically for children depends on the teacher. The teachers are under enormous pressure and have to develop a sense of how the children are doing. Everyone has their own story, their own cultural background, and now they're all here together in this place. So it can be hard to pull myself together when I'm teaching. I have to keep showing them that I'm full of positive energy, which I want to communicate to the children so that they learn to love dance as much as I do. I use the traditional Dabka dance to try to fight the negative energy around us. It's the only way we can get through this. Despite the circumstances, we do our best to put a smile on their faces. I think they're all happy and enjoy the atmosphere we create. I think that in their minds, they're far away from the war.
Is there any hope? Any way out?
I think two sides of a conflict, who have both been severely traumatized, can find a way to reach one another. In the shadow of this shared experience of trauma, they could develop empathy for one another. But I think the exact opposite has happened in Israel and among the Palestinians.
Empathy is a very, very important thing. It's what will allow for people to start communicating again.
The understanding of both societies, of the trauma of the other side, is very important in order to reconcile, no question about that. I don't think that there are groups in both sides, small groups that are talking to each other, families that their sons or daughters were killed. It's very small numbers, and I don't see it in the near future.
I don't believe that the only road to peace is via trauma therapy. We simply don't have the time for that. I believe peace negotiations must begin. Only then can one begin to deal with their respective traumas.
We are not there yet. We are not there yet.